So the purpose of today's discussion, how to begin a conversation about depression and suicide, is extremely important. People are suffering in silence for fear of being judged, for fear of being blamed, and for fear of being ousted from their individual communities. And so after reading multiple articles and listening to conspiracy theories and ideologies discussed, I am concerned for the lack of insight and apathy placed on mental health illnesses such as depression and the unresolved element of depression, suicide. So during this conversation, I am hopeful that this conversation will increase your clarity, will bring awareness, will address some myths or taboos that you have about depression and or suicide, will address symptoms, signs, and help you understand that mental health, depression and suicide does not have respect of person. It doesn't matter your gender preference, your religious orientation, whether or not you're black or white, your age, your occupation, your socioeconomic status. It affects pretty much everybody. And I'm sure if you're like me, it's affected people that are very close to me. So according to World Health Organization, nearly 800,000 people die from suicide every year, which calculates to one person every 40 seconds. That's a global phenomenon that occurs throughout the lifespan. So as unemployment increases, in which it has, stress incurred from isolation happens, a lack of definitive date of this pandemic when it will be over, unresolved grief and loss regarding people not being able to grieve the loss of their loved ones, depression and suicide will hit. And so in order to talk about a problem, we have to identify what that problem looks like. And so Shanice Kelly is going to explain what depression and suicide is and what it entails. Shanice?
Thank you, Dr. Taya. Hi, everybody. I hope everybody is having a great Sunday. It is so beautiful on today, and I'm just really excited to be able to share with you on this evening about depression and suicide. One thing I want to emphasize is that depression happens to everyone. So there is a difference between feeling symptoms of depression versus being clinically diagnosed with depression. And so some of the things we may talk about are symptoms that you may have felt at some particular point in time in your life, but it doesn't necessarily mean that you are diagnosed with clinical depression. And so according to the National Institute of Mental Health, about 16 million adults have experienced a mental health depressive episode, meaning at any point in their life, they have had at least one. And so that just simply means that there was a feeling of sadness, feelings of loss of interest in things for a certain period of time. So it becomes a clinical diagnosis when you just can't shake out of it. If it's persistent for at least 6 months or longer, then at that point, maybe your doctor or your mental health practitioner would then look into a different diagnosis for you. But depression is simply feeling sad. Like, have you ever had just a low day where you're just not feeling well? You're having a hard time just getting up and getting your day started. Very low energy. Have you ever felt helpless or hopeless? Like, nothing is going to work. I'm never going to get through this. Changes in our appetite. Sometimes when you are feeling depressed, you may eat a lot or you may eat very little. So it really depends on the person. There's a change in our sleep patterns too. Some people will oversleep. You're excessively sleeping, can't get up and get out of the bed. And then there's others where we call it insomnia, where you are just up, you can't sleep at all. So those are different types of signs and symptoms. feelings of guilt and worthlessness. Like, I don't know if you ever had moments where you just feel guilty about everything, or you feel like you aren't worthy of something, or just very low. Sometimes we'll say like low self-esteem or negative self-talk. That all kind of goes together. Reckless behavior. So sometimes when people are really depressed, they may do things that you would find like just out of the norm, running the stop sign, knowing that potentially you can kill yourself or kill somebody else, right? Self-harm behavior. It could be inflicting wounds on yourself. Sometimes we see people who self-cut. Sometimes people will burn themselves just to feel a different sensation, a different type of pain than what they're emotionally feeling. Sometimes you'll see people pick at their skin. Those are all different ways of self-harm. Difficulty concentrating. I know I've had days where it was hard to focus at work. Like sometimes there's just days where you just can't, pull it together, and you're just sitting at the computer screen like, well, what was I supposed to be doing? So loss of concentration. You're talking to your friends on the phone and you can't remember what was the last thing you said, and like, what was I just talking about? I think we all have felt these symptoms before. And so that's what I'm trying to do, is normalize it for you. It's like, yes, these things happen. They happen on a daily basis. Have you ever lost a loved one and felt sad? Have you ever felt grief from that? That is a sign of depression. Doesn't mean that you're staying in that place. And that's when it becomes a problem. When these symptoms show up in your life and you're just not able to shake it, and it's affecting how you think, how you feel, and ultimately how you function in your daily activities. The one major thing that depression is highly connected to, which Dr. Taya mentioned before, is suicide. It's a huge risk, right? If you ever hear somebody talking about thoughts of harming themselves, that's a huge sign of suicidal ideation. You'll hear us say that word a lot: suicidal thoughts, suicidal ideation. Let me say this: just because a person has a thought does not mean that they have a plan or an action to actually follow through with the thought. Sometimes thoughts are fleeting thoughts. They may come and go, right? I don't know if anybody's ever had a day was like, oh my God, is life worth living? So it may be something as simple as that. That's one thing, versus someone having persistent thoughts of, I don't want to be here anymore. Life would be so much better without me being here. Nobody would even know that I'm gone. Those type of things, if you keep hearing that over and over again, then that's when it becomes a concern, and that's when we consider it suicidal ideations. Preoccupied with death. So these are all warning signs. So thinking about your loved ones, even about yourself, if these things are showing up for you or someone that you love, co-worker, a neighbor, these are things to be very mindful of, and know that there may be a need of action on your end to jump in and help save somebody's life, essentially. Preoccupied with death. So if somebody is constantly talking about death or the actual thought of dying, that is a warning sign. If people are saying goodbye, so if people are doing goodbye visits and they're talking about leaving or I'm going away, and they're not very clear on where they're going or what's happening, but it's almost like they're making their last rounds, that's something to be very mindful of. Also giving away items. So we call that getting their affairs in order, right? So they may be decluttering their home, giving away things that are really of value to them, maybe like their car or really expensive jewelry that like this is something they would never, get rid of. If they're starting to give away items like that, that may be an indication that they are making a plan to exit. And then a sudden switch from depression to feeling calm and happy. So sometimes too, there'll be an automatic switch to I'm fine, I'm good, because they don't want you to be concerned. They don't want you to feel worried about them. They don't want you to be able to see beyond what you see. And so that's something to be very mindful of when you're talking to someone or just observing someone. It is okay to talk about it. I think that's the biggest thing that we want to get out there tonight, is like, we have to have these conversations, because these conversations will save someone's life. 9 times out of 10, when someone is experiencing suicidal ideations or planning to commit suicide. I don't always like to use the word commit because I am a mental health professional and we try not to use the word commit. But when someone is in the act of it, thinking of it, or getting ready to act out a plan, 9 times out of 10, they just want someone to notice them. They want to be heard. They want to be validated in their feelings, where they're currently at. And honestly, they're seeking for help. Okay, so always think about that. Keep that in mind when you're working with someone too.